Deep Dive Film School makes no claim of ownership of the film footage used in this episode. The film footage is owned entirely by the copyright holders. Also, we're going to spoil the hell out of this movie, so this is your warning. Welcome to Deep Dive Film School!
This week we continue our stop-motion animation festival with 2009 Wes Anderson film Fantastic Mr. Fox.
Let's cuss and dive in. All right, everybody, I'm Adam Sherlock.
And I'm Adam Palter.
And if you like what you see /here, please like and subscribe. You can find us in all the spaces and places that people what?
Find average media.
Or whatever's free.
Free media.
Free media. That's what we should put on a bumper sticker. Deep Dive Film School. Free media. I mean, it's all free, people. It's all free. It just depends on how much you want to subscribe and look at stuff and all that. I mean,
for us, we're not making any money out of this shit.
I mean, it costs us a lot.
Time-wise.
Yes. And effort-wise. And
Happy to do it.
And we hope that you all notice that.
So please like and subscribe.
Yeah. It's literally the least you can do. All right, we are in the third episode of our festival here.
Fascinating festival, really fun festival. This is top of the hill for me, though, when it comes to the stop motion stuff. Not just because it's stop motion. I think it's just a great medium for Wes Anderson.
Okay, yeah.
I think Roald Dahl and his charming way he tells a story and how Anderson can make that in his own charming way. Mm-hmm. And the fact that this is stop motion, and anyone who knows anything about Wes Anderson, he loves the little details and everything. And here, he gets to control every single one.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute. So Wes Anderson is known for his... I mean, obviously he's known for several things. I would say actor choice, the way he writes dialogue, music cues, the whimsy of it. But there is this ephemera, this very textural ephemera to Wes Anderson films. I think that sometimes is referred to as being whimsical or as being sort of like twee, yeah. But really, it's I mean, it's crayons, it's coloring books, it's old records, it's all of these things that you remember from childhood, right? And I mean, he's what? Maybe
you can tap into the nostalgia.
Well, he's maybe a handful of years older than us,
Not
right?
Much so, yeah.
And so things like board games, right? I mean, thinking of like a lot of the textural stuff you see in Royal Tenenbaums, right? Sure. It's like that's very much his sort of wheelhouse. And when I first heard that he was doing a stop motion film, I was like, I wonder how that's going to play out. And the second I saw what it looked like, I was like, it looks like a diorama, a shoebox diorama you would make in elementary school, right? With like the salt Play-Doh, right? And like the popsicle sticks. And I was like, oh, that makes perfect sense because it fits in with all the rest of his ephemera, which does have, it's a very different look, which is funny because in the pre-production phase for the first year or so, Selick was attached to this.
I was going to say, like, all of these movies look very different and have their own unique style, but I would say it's probably closest core line to
except
the festival.
Except that I would say, with the exception of a handful of scenes where it does get a little more... especially with the above ground stuff, what are the three farmers? There's
Bogus Bunts and Beans.
Bogus Bunts and Beans. Thank you. With the exception of that, which does have a very somewhere between Latka Studios and Aardman Studios vibe to it.
The world is smaller in Coraline, but here he's able to pull out a lot bigger scale, especially because these are foxes living underground, inside of trees, as opposed to the real big world. You know,
like a Victorian houses, like we see.
One of Meryl Streep's paintings, they're this big, right? They're
yeah. But there's something about that, I mean, for lack of a better term, scruffiness. There's a scruffiness that makes you think you're smelling Elmer's glue and like you're seeing popsicle sticks. Like it feels like a world like created by children.
Weirdly rough. Right?
Yeah.
But in like this intentionally?
Intentionally in a very charming way, because Anderson did work with Selick on Life Aquatic. There's all those like animated sea urchins and things that you see in that was all Selick.
Wrote this with Noah Baumbach.
That's right. Well. That's right.
So
yeah,
they wrote this together, and obviously based off of a Roald Dahl book. And they even show the book at the beginning.
Yep.
And this is the first book his mom bought him as a child at 7 years old, and he still has it to this day. It's on his book.
That Anderson has?
Yes. So
that makes so much sense.
Yeah, he had an attachment to this story and to this book, and you throw in his clever charm on top of this. I'm sure some of this was in the book with some of these characters, but I would say this is more of a Wes Anderson movie than it is a Roald Dahl.
Oh, very much so. And I think that, Roald Dahl always had elements that were, I don't want to say fully adult, but that were definitely prickly in a way that was different. You think like James and the Giant Peach, like the two women who raised James are awful, right? And like, so like, there's a little twinkle, a little touch of child abuse in there, and not very different than other nursery rhymes or fairy tales that you hear. But I think that like this idea, so a really big difference, probably one of the biggest differences, is that the movie Fantastic Mr. Fox has chapter 1, 2, and 3. Chapter 2 is the book, for the most part.
Okay.
Another really big difference would be that Fantastic Mr. Fox in the book has 4 children, and they kind of conglomerate those into 2 children.
I didn't know that.
One that's his son, and one that's Christopherson, which is the nephew.
Yeah.
So there's but again, still dealing with these things.
Athletic.
Yeah, still dealing with these themes that Dahl had in his book, which is like, how do I get my dad to notice me? How can I? Right? It's like all of these different layers and tropes and things that we understand so well. But that third act, the book ends at the dinner scene where he toasts to everybody. And I love that Anderson is like, no, he's not the hero yet. Everything still has to get ruined before he can truly become the hero. Mm-hmm. And instead, what ends up happening is
extends past what the book does.
Okay. Yeah.
So the last act is all him?
It's all him, yeah. Okay. So the book ends with, and it's, again, beautifully children's book-esque, is that they're trying to smoke out Mr. Fox, and so they're all waiting at the other end of the hole that they've put all the stuff into. But the foxes and all the animals get away, and the end of the book, I believe, ends with saying that the 3 guys they might still be waiting in that hole to this very day. Mm-hmm. Right? Like that he outsmarted them. He never came. Yeah.
We definitely have to talk about the cast here.
Yes.
We got Clooney, Meryl Streep, Jason Schwartzman, who may be the best part of this movie.
I agree with that. Yes.
Bill Murray, Willem Dafoe, a lot of regulars here for Anderson, Owen Wilson, Jarvis Cocker randomly, and of course Dumbledore is in this.
That's
Michael
right.
Gambon.
Yes.
But I think a unique thing about this, how they made this, was they actually shot this on a farm and went underground in some places and went into the certain atmospheres and recorded the voiceover as you like in a realistic setting, even though it's not
months before they even started the animation. Yeah. They had all of the, it's basically a radio play before they started the animation. Exactly. Yeah. And what's
interesting?
What else is interesting about that is, if you think about it, even in something like Coraline, where, or on Anomalisa, I think in both cases, less so with Anomalisa, but you have actors who are doing voice acting for an animation. Mm-hmm. and they heighten it up because they know that they're playing a little rabbit, right? And so they do that thing. And here
because they're in front of a microphone, not an actor.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, well, even if they are an actor, they know that they're doing a voiceover
for in front of another actor.
Yeah. And so, I see. Yes, exactly.
They're not reacting to someone.
And instead here, it's like the voices, it's subverting of the entire genre, the way in which the performances were captured. They are so a Wes Anderson film.
Totally.
Right? Where they are still just being like, oh, well, I guess if that's how you feel. And you're like, but I'm watching an animated Fox say that. And so like, it's so, it's such a beautiful juxtaposition to the thing that you're looking at that it kind of makes it almost the most perfect Wes Anderson film. It somehow like heightens it even beyond what he's so good at in this way where it's like to see this little animated creature be like, okay, well,
it's all about
I guess I'll go to bed. And you're like, oh my God, the fact that it's this little animal saying that, it's taking that whimsy that we already know about Anderson and like turning it up to 11 in this really fantastic way.
Well, and there's a million talking animal movies. And that, what you just hit on, is why it's different.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you can make all sorts of animated movies, even stop-motion animated talking movies. But just to lay into how tough this is sometimes, just like what it takes to do a stop-motion film. There was altogether 535 puppets made for this film. 17 different styles alone for Mr. Fox, and it had to be done in 6 different sizes. And he alone had 102 of those 535 puppets.
My God.
Which is insane. But just like it shows you how much goes into making one of these and how long they're doing it, right?
Well, and that's, I guess it's, I mean, I you know, as I've said in earlier episodes of this festival, I teach this art form to kids, and I always talk about patience, how important it is to stay with your vision. I make all the kids storyboard everything ahead of time. I'm like, this is your map, right? And so this is what your characters are doing. And to have that patience and to have that dedication to the fidelity of your vision. But what's interesting is to think about that with a big budget film. It's like, yeah, you definitely have a whole team that's thinking about all that stuff, but you're also like, for the amount of time that it takes to move this little talking dog from one side of the screen to the other, you're like, this fucker better be worth it. And so you're having him like, whoa, wow, and like doing backflips and jumping all over the place and all this stuff. And for this movie yeah, there's still some backflips and there's some like funny action sequences. Sure. But they're all done in a Wes Anderson, very subdued style. Like, even the action sequences are deadpan because that's his style. That's what he knows and what he's good at. And that restraint of vision is what makes this actually work. And somehow that's a feat unto itself that you don't notice.
I definitely think you have to put some of that on the acting, though. I don't think he would be fantastic if it wasn't George Clooney, right? Or and Ash wouldn't be nearly as funny or desperate if it wasn't Jason Schwartzman.
Completely. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And just Meryl Streep, obviously one of the greatest, being the mom here, and she's just like, you know, she's so good at being.
I'm
the mom.
pregnant. I want a divorce.
They're reckless.
Just
love
like,
but even when she's just like, if what I think is happening isn't happening, it better not be.
It better not be. Yeah, exactly. Perfect like, Wes Anderson line. Exactly. But again, that's what I'm saying is like somehow, I mean, you think about if a regular Wes Anderson film being shot front to back would take how long?
Year.
Yeah. And this probably took 3 times that amount of time.
2 or 3 years, yeah.
And so you're like, to still watch it back, watch the dailies back, watch the dailies back, sync it with the audio and be like, okay, what's the song that happens underneath it? Like all those little moments. And just to be like
each aspect.
Well,
yeah,
it's
music
like,
cues are great.
It's like when we, when, you know, the fear that I talked about having, seeing a Tarantino film that was in a different language and being like, will it all will it all still gel? Like that's when the rubber meets the road, right? Like that's when you know somebody is or isn't good at what they do is, can you do this in a different medium? Yeah. And I think a stop motion animated film is like such a here's a good example. You know that Gore Verbinski's as good as at what he does when you see Rango, and you're like, it still feels like a Gore Verbinski film, right? It still feels as weird and funny as a Pirates of the Caribbean film.
It's the little bits of genius that make it unique, right? And relatable, also a little weird. And, I'm talking about just the... Like the little trademark,
it's kind of my thing.
Click he has, and just the way they eat, and just replacing every bad word with the word cuss, and just like that's so genius and so Wes Anderson that he really takes over this story here.
Yeah, well, and I think he adopts fully. Thinking of something like not the television show because I didn't like it, but the film adaptation of a series of unfortunate events.
Oh yeah.
This owning of the voice of the author. And even though they did alter a lot in order to make that movie be what it was.
If you're here to see the happy little bunny.
And they do a whole stop motion intro with the happy little bunny. And it's like, it's brilliantly done.
Yeah.
And then, Jude Law does such a great job with that. But you're like, those are all liberties that were taken by the people who took the original author's stuff and said, what's this personality? And even though Roald Dahl never had Are You Cussing With Me?
Yeah.
You could picture him having that in there. Like, it fits so well into that world. Even though it's a little more sly and nudge and wink, it's also like, it's pretty perfect. It's pretty pitch. Yeah. It's pretty pitch perfect. Or the badger, like, and he's like, give me a sign that you understand me. He's like, it's like, okay, good. Like all those little moments, you're like, that feels a little more postmodern and like it might pull us out a little bit. But I only think that's because Roald Dahl's books are older. I think if Roald Dahl was writing those today, those little flights of fancy would all be in there. Like the cussing thing, I'm like, that's so perfect. I wish it was
in every movie now.
It's perfect. It's so perfect for that world. And so I think in those ways, like Anderson really is owning up to, and I'd say this too. I was thinking about this when I was watching it. Those are modernized things in a Roald Dahl story, and they're the right version of being modernized, where it's like, oh, they're going to go and rob this place, and a Who song is going to start playing or whatever, right? And you're like, yeah, it's punk rock. It's rad. The bad version of that is like, the Oompa Loompas are going to sing a rap song in the new Tim Burton Charlie and the Chocolate Factory or whatever. And I'm like, no, you tried to modernize it and you did it the wrong way. Like there's a way to do it right and a way to do it wrong. And he really owns the spirit of it in a way that makes perfect sense where other people have tried to do it. And it's, or like even the BFG, when Spielberg did that, it's like, he tried to make it too realistic. I'm like, the BFG should have been stop motion animation. Like, and it would have been so charming and wonderful, right? But instead you're like, he's a real man. And you're like, why? Well, and who wants to see that?
He makes every character relatable. They're all they have their different motivations, I mean, it ultimately comes down to Fantastic or Mr. Fox being a wild beast. Right?
Yeah.
But his original motivation was he hates being poor. He's tired of being poor.
Right.
He doesn't want to do that. And then, Ash is different. And Christopherson just wants to fit in.
Yeah.
And, And
so Christopherson's amazing at stuff, but he's like, I don't want to be. I just want to be your buddy.
Yeah, it's not my fault. He's like, I'm a natural.
Isn't there...
That kid's a natural. Oh my gosh, did you see that?
Oh, don't try to compare yourself to him.
He's an athlete.
The other part I want to touch on really quickly is how interesting it is. And I feel like only Wes Anderson could do this because he understands in his other movies, think about something like Bottle Rocket, where it's like you have a character like Dignan who makes like a 25-year plan in this spiral notebook. Mm-hmm. And that like, you go, oh, I always knew people like when I was little, like my little sister would make notebook plans like this. Mm-hmm. But you're like, the idea of an adult doing that is a funny joke, but then the subtext of that funny joke is this dark, unspoken sadness of like he doesn't have anything to look forward to in his life, right? And you go, God, there's layers there, man. That was amazing. You took a joke and then you turned it into all these other things. That in that same way, you could take the simplicity of Fantastic Mr. Fox and be like, oh, we could tell this funny story and have some more adult themes in it. But then what Anderson does is he goes to this place of this midlife crisis that Mr. Fox is going through, where he's like, I don't just want to work for some stupid cussing newspaper. Like I have this thing I'm really good at, and my wife doesn't want me to do it, so I got to do it in secret.
Well, they buy the tree, and Bogus Bunsen Bean, like he just sees it, and then we get the Bill Murray Badger lawyer, like explaining their history and the creepy song that the kids sing about him, and getting their whole introduction, and it's such Wes Anderson like segment montage of everything here. And then, of course, you have Bill Murray.
But then it just leads back to this idea of, like, something we can all, identify with, which is, like, I'm not being the thing I'm good at. I have this other thing I'm really good at. And I know that when I do it, I get in trouble. But, like, I can do this, And, like, I got to prove to everybody I'm still that guy. Because that's what they loved about me before, right? And
he was a whack-bat player, and he was famous.
Yeah, he was a famous whack-bat player.
He wants
to your father could play whack-bat like nobody's business.
He wants to relive the old days.
Yeah, don't compare yourself to him.
Even that first scene, the very first scene where he's standing by the tree eating an apple, and he has the little radio thing on. And
oh my God!
She's come from the doctor, everything,
and he's playing his own theme song through his little radio, like all those little elements. But again, like it's so, even though it's a movie about talking animals, it's so human.
Yeah.
Their motivations and their wishes and desires are so human in that way that it really does. It resonates.
You're supposed to be my lab partner.
Yeah.
Ash here, like I said, he's just, different.
He's just different. Yeah.
And he's so perfect. And and if it wasn't Jason Schwartzman, like the scene that I go to every time is when he's laying in his bed reading his white cape comic book. He's just in his tiny little undies, and it's the first night Christopherson is sleeping there, and he makes him sleep under the table where the train set is. And it's just being a total dick to him.
Yeah,
like he just the whole half the movie he's a total dick to him, right? Yep. And he eventually ends up realizing it, but his whole hills and valleys of his
arc is amazing.
Perfect. Yeah, it wouldn't be the same if it wasn't Jason Schwartzman. I really don't think.
Completely agree.
It's his delivery, his sense of humor. He was made to be. I mean, obviously Rushmore, it made Jason Schwartzman famous, but but it just wouldn't. He understands what Anderson is trying to do and his sense of humor.
That's it. I was about to say, and I hadn't thought about this before until you started talking about that, and it's like every actor here has worked to some varying degree with Anderson and
Except for Clooney, right? Clooney, this might be his first time with him.
Can that be right?
I think so. I could be wrong.
But I think that and I guess, or just his reputation precedes him and everybody knows.
Yeah.
So this idea of dial it back. Just, you're not a talking animal. You're just a person.
Yeah.
And you're doing this. Mm-hmm. And that vision, again, is what makes it into what it is. If anybody, the only person who's chomping a tiny bit of scenery here, which is completely well worth it, is Willem. Well, I was going to say Willem Dafoe.
Oh, yeah.
As the weasel, which is perfect. Like that, come on.
He's a rat.
Yeah. Or yes, I guess. Yeah. In my head, it's just that.
But Willem Dafoe
Dafoe is always a weasel.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's a good point. No, but he's allowed to ham it up.
Oh, he's the best. Then his character's death is amazing, where it's just like, well, I guess he was a good guy at the end, or whatever. Like, it's so funny, and you're like, yeah, he's, you don't always have to remain a rat. It's so good. It's just, it's a classic, and it's funny because I think when I first read that this is what Anderson wanted to do.
You're like, oh, is this a kid's movie? And it kind of is. It mostly is.
Or it just
But it does have that layer of adult humor there that adults can still enjoy it. And that's always kind of like, I know people try and do that a lot, and sometimes it works. Like, oh, we got some sense of humor that the adults will
Or
understand
it
or have
felt
fun.
like
Or is
weird.
it just because it's Wes Anderson?
Or it just felt like weird self-serving-ish. Like, again, like the film version, even though I really like it, the film version, the live film version of Where the Wild Things Are, is like, it's an interesting experiment, but it's not a classic kids movie. It's a sad, weird movie for adults that remember the book when they were kids, and it's got, and who might like Michelle Gondry or Karen O.
And
like, it's a weird,
it's
or Spike
great.
Jonze or
Spike
whoever.
Jonze,
Yeah. But it's like, it's weird. It's not a classic. And somehow I feel like that Fantastic Mr. Fox was born from the same desire as Spike Jonze's Where the Wild Things Are, which is like, I love this thing. I think I have a great crew. I think I have the right vision. And then Fantastic Mr. Fox is a classic. Like Fantastic Mr. Fox, kids who don't know anything about Wes Anderson can love it and grow up with it.
Or Roald Dahl or anything.
Or anything, right?
In the movie. Like, it's just immediately a classic.
Yeah.
Because of Anderson. I mean, it really is.
His vision.
It's his vision. It's his attention to detail.
Yep.
You know how much he loves the symmetry of things.
Yep.
He, again, one of my very first points is he loves controlling his little universes that he's doing. And the fact that he can control every single element.
Literally. Yes.
Literally. I love the scene when we get introduced to Bean and he's smoking and the light of the cigarette like lights up his face.
Yes. Yeah.
Like just little things like that. And of course the music cues and the cutaways and the sense of humor and the animation itself, plus just the way it looks.
I mean,
and the dance scene, like it's just
what did you play with like G.I. Joes as a kid?
Yeah.
What was your thing? So did you ever do
as much as you did?
Did you do the thing where it was like, here's the secret layer and you draw the map and like where the secret hatches are and the ladders and stuff and where the helicopter lands?
I don't know if I got that detailed.
God, all the time I did this shit.
Yes, I can.
And
imagine.
that to me, like, you know, there's the scene in Life Aquatic where it's like, here's the ship and it's showing you all the parts of it, and I was like,
you get like the profile shot.
That's the thing. And there's the same thing here where, like I said, it is a shoebox diorama. Like, it is a shoebox diorama come to life. And it is, I guess, you know what it is? This is the term. It's endlessly satisfying.
Well, and they also are, I mean, I agree, it is. I could watch it for 2 more hours.
Yeah.
Like, I wish it was a 3-hour movie.
Yeah, totally.
But they all confront their fears. Their feelings, and they compromise for the family, right? And there's something fantastic about that, right? And like as a group, you know, they finally, after they get washed out that second time, with the cider poaches,
the cider poaches.
After they get washed out, they really are forced, and like Mr. Fox is forced to admit to his wife what's going on, and they have this beautiful scene with the waterfall in the background. That's so
amazing. And you
stunning.
Go, oh my God, the animation to do that.
Seriously.
Oh my God.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And you know, and then you know, they took everything. And like just the scene of Bean tearing up the little trailer because he's pissed that they got him.
Oh my God, it's amazing.
Can you imagine?
Just throwing that stuff,
like,
and they're both sitting there like, oh shit. Like, yeah.
I mean, think of the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood scene of Leonardo DiCaprio forgetting his lines in the trailer. It's like a version of that.
That's a good comparison,
you know?
yeah.
But like,
it up.
If you think about the what it took for the stop motion for that scene of him destroying that room, insane.
Yeah.
It had to have taken 3 months.
Yeah.
Just for that.
Yeah.
Wild to think about. I love this little part of, this is a fun thread throughout, is when they shoot off his tail and he wears it as a tie through the rest of the movie. And that's Ash's motivation.
Ash is trying to get it back. Yeah, I love all that.
Just amazing little stuff like that. But you know, and then of course we get the little title cards with a Gopher Broke rescue mission and
I love
all that stuff. Like
I love like the way in which the outlaw, the outlaw aspect of it. Like, here, put on this bandit mask.
Yeah,
again, for a group like we have the quote unquote realism of like, this was 3 weeks Fox time, so it's 2 days human time. Yet they all wear clothes, and he has a bunch of tiny bandit masks for all of them.
So good.
Like, all of that stuff is just it's so charming and so funny.
What is his line that he has? He's like, why are you wearing that fake bandit mask? Where did you get that ginger apple snap?
That's
right. He's just calling out these random things. And just the little flights of fancy and the little weird places he goes, especially like, think about the campfire song that Jarvis Cocker is singing.
It's so strange.
Just for the payoff of like, that's just bad songwriting,
yeah.
Petey.
Yeah. And you're like, the amount of time it took to produce that
Just
one
for that
part.
joke.
Yeah. Yeah. And apparently
That's
Jarvis Cocker was like, hey, he had me write like 4 songs for it. And then one of them, he was like, I need some lines from you for this. And he was like, okay. And so he went in and did that. And he was like, I didn't know what we were doing. Like, I just reacted and read the lines. And then when I saw the finished film, I was like, oh, I'm in it. He's like, because I just thought I was like singing the songs.
Made a version of it.
Yeah, and they made like a little, he's like, there was a little version of me. Like, that's just
Petey.
bad songwriting, Petey. It's a feat. And obviously I love, and we both do love Isle of Dogs. I think Isle of Dogs, what I love about it separately from Fantastic Mr. Fox is A, I guess that it's an original story, and B, the humans in it, there's a much larger human sub-story or a secondary story that's really interesting and beautifully shot in a very different way than what's happening here.
Yeah, it is different.
But, man, I mean, Fantastic Mr. Fox, what do you say about it? It's a classic. It is.
It's just, he's quote-unquote fantastic, right? And then we definitely have to talk about Volpez and him kind of giving he faces his fear with they're beautiful creatures, aren't they?
So silly that the wolf puts its it's so good though. You're just like, it's like the final triumphant moment of like, yeah, man. He's
facing all of his fears.
It's so corny though. It's amazing.
It's great though.
Yeah.
Volpez. What a beautiful, just like you said, it is a classic. It's hard to deny. And I really if you're a person who hates this movie or doesn't like this movie, you don't want to know him. I don't understand you as a person.
He doesn't want to know you.
No, I don't. I'm sorry.
No, I just I think it takes, and I mean, I understand some people getting like exhausted with his Anderson's whimsy or whatever. Yeah. But my feeling is the opposite, which is
especially here where it leans so much into the quirkiness.
We need that. I think that especially, in particular as I see like, like Matt Reeves made a Batman that's even darker than the darkest Batman. The darkest Batman you've seen. This one's darker. When you go and see it in the theater, you almost can't see it because it's so fucking dark. And it's like at some point we eclipse past the moon and have to head back into brightness. And I'm glad that there are people like Anderson who are like, this can still be a little edgy and silly and goofy, but it's gonna be good.
But even it's gonna be fun. Mr. Fox in the movie does the same thing, where they have he has this big speech at the end, and he's trying to get his tail back and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And then Bean pulls out all the firepower, and he's like, "Actually, we should go now."
Yeah, actually, we should go right now. Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Is it subverts itself in the ways that it needs to, but at the same time, it's like I'm like for that flight of fancy and for that childlike love and wonder, like I'm fucking here for it, man. And I love some of the craziest, darkest shit ever. But like, I love this too because I think I don't know. Sometimes and sometimes it's good to just laugh and be like, that made me feel good. Yeah. And like, this is one of those.
There's nothing wrong with the movie that makes you feel good.
Yeah.
Of course. And I'm with you. I love the darker the better, the more depressing, like, change me.
Like, make me never feel the same again.
I'm glad, I said this about Coraline too, but I'm just like, I'm glad a movie like this exists.
Completely.
Right?
And I think that Isle of Dogs is like, sort of a companion piece to this where I'm like, it'd be amazing if every, like Rankin Bass or something with like Rudolph. It's like, what if every 5 years Wes Anderson's like, here's another animated film. I'm like,
very well
then you know what? Our kids and our grandkids might be okay. If the world is still here and not on fire for them to experience it, then that'd be amazing.
Yeah. Great film. I'm sure we've talked about it in the past, but not probably this in depth.
No.
And just Classic. Like you said, there's no
Completely.
other word. It
Yep.
really is. That's why I say it's at the top of the hill for me when it comes to not only just stop motion, but animation in general.
It's just so good.
It's amazing. Something I can turn on anytime.
Yep.
Laugh my ass off. Enjoy myself. The whole family does. And yeah, just classic. So thank you very much for listening. We were going to end out our festival with My Life as Zucchini, and then do a Forgotten Gem of Mary and Max, the Australian film.
Yep. And
Very
we got a
excited to do that.
couple of that one scenes we're going to sprinkle in between. I don't think we've really come up with anything quite yet, but that's up next.
Absolutely. So
Yep.
please like and subscribe. Watch all the playlists. Go to YouTube. Go to anywhere you have a podcast and give us a listen. Appreciate it.
Bye, you guys.
Thank you.